I'm not going to have someone just come to me and say, here's the numbers, put them on my tax return without any backup information and sign my name to it. Yes, you get the client to sign off that they're swearing to you that the numbers are right. But that's not like the type of business I want to do. I want to help business owners, and I want to make sure that the numbers are accurate.
Yeah.
So I think that's important, because I think that if you're making decisions based on wrong numbers, that's pretty scary.
Welcome to the AI in Accounting podcast, which helps accounting, bookkeeping, and finance professionals prepare for the future of outsourced accounting and accounting technology. Plus, you'll learn how to use artificial intelligence, AI, automation, and machine learning to scale your accounting practice. Now, here's your host, Joshua Feinberg of Vic.ai.
Welcome to today's episode of the AI and Accounting podcast. I'm being joined today by a very special guest, Michele Maybaum of Raich Ende Malter, works out of the office in Midtown Manhattan. Thanks so much for joining me today, Michele.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So what I usually like to start out these podcasts by learning a little bit more about your background, kind of where you got to, how you got to where you are in your journey, how your team is structured within the firm as a whole, and where you see things headed.
Okay. Well, I've been doing, accounting for quite a while. I started out, I was 14 years old, and I decided to help Dad out with some of the bookkeeping, and I really liked it. And what I really loved was dealing with the clients and listening to the stories of how the clients started their businesses and the issues that they had all along. And so, just from the very beginning, it was always an advisory piece to it. And as time went on, even before everybody was in the cloud, we were always looking for the next computer technology. So we were always, having computers before, and before you could have, before there was like Windows and stuff, we had something called Unix, trying to have like multi-user. And because at the beginning, we were having diskettes with red dots and green dots, and sort of the history, dating myself a little bit, but the history of computers and accounting. But we were able to find, programs that ran on the Unix system, but we had to have like a standalone PC for things like Lotus and to do loan amortizations, because that stuff, nobody was writing for that yet in what was basically the beginning of networks and computers. And then as time went on, obviously, there was, along came probably one of the biggest transformations was in the 90s, when you had this thing come along called QuickBooks. And, we started, and we were putting everybody on QuickBooks Desktop, and we ran desktop. And in 2014, our rep at the time came and said, listen, you guys got to come to the first QuickBooks Connect. It's going, cloud-based. And, I know the product that was here a couple years ago was not so good. We've made it better. We're going to keep making it better. And so, and I basically moved all my clients, with very, very few exceptions, into the cloud-based arena. And, and doing the same thing I always did is like, okay, here's how we did last month, and this is what's happening, and let's have conversations about it. And, what is it, that you need, and how can we help you reach your goals and fix what's really going wrong in the business. So, and that's sort of the history in a nutshell.
What's fascinating about that to me is, with talking with a lot of people like yourself, you'd be surprised how often the seeds of being an accountant are starting in teenage years, working side by side in Dad's practice. So there must be doing something right there to keep the profession healthy and vibrant. And maybe it's a matter of looking to the past and seeing what can be done going forward to keep accounting an exciting.
Yeah, and now we have my nephews working with us now too. So.
Awesome. So it keeps going and keeps going the family tree. That's terrific. And it's funny too, when you mentioned Unix, I remember I had an econ professor in college who got everyone started on Lotus 123. And I remember the keyboard shortcuts at the time. And that was really something to be able to build electronics. But this is probably 2 or 3 years before the first iteration of Windows. And yeah, remember the original QuickBooks Desktop coming out. And
we were all really, really, really young back then.
Cool. So Most of what I want to talk to you about today is client accounting services, outsourced accounting, being outsourced CFO. If you were to run into somebody who's brand new to this, what would you tell them is the most important thing for somebody that's new to providing outsourced client accounting services, being an outsourced CFO?
They definitely have to start with a plan. They have to figure out what it is they want to do specifically and how they want to do it. I mean, after the why, as Simon Sinek says, you always start with the why. Why do you want to do this? Where's your place in the market? And who do you want to serve? And I think that the first thing you have to do is you have to pick your client accounting solution, especially if you're starting out and you're doing business on your own. I'm part of a firm, so we can offer, more different solutions and more industries. But if someone's kind of going out and starting on their own, they really need to pick, you're going to do QuickBooks Online, you're going to do Xero, and at some point, or do you want to even specialize and do a higher level, like we work with Sage Intacct. So I think you have to really pick that, and then you have to build the rest of your tech stack, which bill payment, if you're going to do bill payment, payroll, picking all of the different pieces of the tech stack, which I think is probably the biggest challenge that's out there because, I remember going to the first QuickBooks Connect and there were 300 app partners, and then next year it's 1,500, and now there's just thousands, and everybody's, and then some of them get bought up and become part of some of the other, things consolidate, and it's continually moving, and you always sit there and say, who's going to be the next application to be purchased? So it could be kind of overwhelming because I sit there and I'm like, trying to say you can't do every piece of technology. So it's really, really hard to decide which ones you're going to use. I mean, the client accounting piece is probably the easiest. We've always done QuickBooks, so we stayed with QuickBooks. I've never really worked in Xero, but knowing the size of the clients of our firm that's why I've started to do Sage Intacct, and sitting there and being able to, with a client maybe that's a little bit larger, being able to sit there and the client, just having conversations about really watching like freight compared to cost of goods sold and things like information that the client really wants, and creating all these dashboards. And if you're using QBO, there's your Cavincis, your Spotlight, your Fathoms, all of those kind of reporting that can help out to expand upon what you can do in QuickBooks to really get that information. And that's what the client wants. We had a great client meeting yesterday and a client that's on Intacct, and I made my partner come in so he could see it, so that, start to see what we're really doing. And he was totally blown away, because then it's clients all into it, and it's a husband and wife, and we basically were dealing with the wife, and all of a sudden if the husband's there, now we're talking, heavy duty numbers and the keys to what's going on in their business, and now all of a sudden he's sitting there next to her. That I've been working on this client for years, and this is just a brand new occurrence, so it's really, really cool. Because this is the stuff the clients want. They don't really, tax return, or I file my return, I don't really want to pay. Do I need a financial statement for a bank? Okay, yeah, I really don't want to pay for that. But now help them with their business, help them really understand the numbers and some of the drivers. And every business has different key performance indicators. So it's really, really important to help the client figure out what those are and listen to what they're telling you, what they're trying to find out, what they think they are, and working with them to really build the dashboards so that the clients can make those decisions. And know, because sometimes what happens is they'll have a big customer, and the big customer will put pressure on them about pricing. But, that's great. Joke is if you had another $1 million in sales, you'd be bankrupt, so that's sort of the direction that we're taking it, which is really more of your outsourced CFO. And the way I do it is putting the client onto, working with anybody that's on the client's staff. I'm not saying we have to do everything. I don't believe in that necessarily, depending on who they have on staff. And we just piggyback on top.
It's really interesting. With a lot of the people that I've spoken to about Intacct, there seems to be a general trend towards wanting to move smaller companies there sooner rather than later, where I guess the conventional wisdom 3-5 years ago was you start out on like QBO or Xero and you graduate up to Sage Intacct. It seems a general message that I'm hearing more of is trying to get even small businesses, even startups, to adopt and I guess pick certain parts of it to so it's a less technical debt to move later.
Reasoning is, and it's not really supposed to, go into details about it with the client, but because of the Sage Intacct Accounting Partner Program, they make it, let's say, a lot more attractive for a smaller company to go in. So we picked, and the first one that I did, we picked someone small, because anybody who starts with a really large one is just asking for a disaster. So, as a matter of fact, when I joined the program, I started to talk, I asked people, I picked people's brains, and this one person said, yeah, I sold this big new client and it was a disaster, because that's what he chose for his first Sage Intacct implementation, and that's not necessarily the best choice. You want to start with something so you can really see the inner workings without being, drowned in the volume and the complexity.
Yeah, so I totally see how a big part of the strategy plan is picking your tech stack and setting that as the foundation to build the whole practice on top of. I spoke to somebody a couple months ago also, who was like literally tasking somebody from, and it was a relatively small firm. His job was to investigate third-party apps, like be in perpetual R&D mode going through the app store and coming and like saying, hey, we should try that, we should try that. But there's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah, and and again, that's not revenue generating. That's sometimes a bit of a problem, and you have to sort of balance. You have to really balance that, and sometimes, a lot of times, it's like, I have to be honest. Sometimes we'll pick something on the fly because the client needs it, and you got to see how some of these things work. And what's an issue is that you've got different client, and like, for example, let's say one particular inventory application is the one you like, but it may not work exactly the way your client wants to do things. Because we'll have one client who's doing build of materials. We have one client where, if you're making clothing, you have like the matrix where you've got color and size, and so build of materials, that it's a specialized scenario, because it has to be able to. You can't sit there and go and say, I'm going to make size small in green, and then medium in green, and so on and so forth, and then start with the blue, and have to keep going through that process within your accounting software to record the cost of the build of materials. So you really have to have something that can actually, you could put the matrix in and it understands how to pull out the quote unquote recipe for the garment, and be able to know how to do it in that matrix. So that can be a little bit tricky. So you have to kind of pick, and that may not be the same as the inventory application that you normally use. And it goes along with inventory and production as opposed to just inventory. So it's managing the tech is probably the biggest challenge by far in overall in the space. There's no question.
Yeah, and it seems like that's clearly the direction that most of the industry has morphed in over the last 5 or 10 years, especially with outsourced, is not only are you trying to solve real business problems and provide value to help them grow, but you have to really act as a technologist.
Absolutely. And
CTO.
Yeah, it's really challenging, and it's frustrating, because sometimes for a certain particular area you pick one, and then you're like mad because you realize that the other one you didn't pick was much better than what you picked. I just see one of the guys on, and one of the things also for some of the people who are jumping in, they should be going onto some of all these different QuickBooks Facebook groups and stuff, and really listening to what everybody's talking about. But one thing they're actually having people having a debate on Slack versus Teams. I'm like, okay, I get it, but our firm, we use Teams, and so that's what we use.
Yeah.
But the video conferencing part's not as good as Zoom, so I still have my Zoom account.
Yeah, at some point you get to pick standards. Otherwise, supporting multiple platforms is tough to get the efficiency right.
Yeah, so it's a balancing act between saying we want to have a standardized tech stack, and we bring every client in and say, this is what you have to use, this suite. And, and that might work, in some percentage, whether it's 70, 80, 90% of the cases. But we find that so many things, and especially industries, and that's why I know they talk about niche, and there's this balancing act about niches, whether you're going to go into a niche or you're going to go into a vertical or micro vertical. I mean, and it's interesting. You want to, we lost a client years ago. We had a ton of healthcare professionals, but we lost our chiropractor to someone who specialized specifically in chiropractors. And I thought, okay, that's very, very narrow, and I guess it's okay. But then I'm thinking, do I want to spend every single day doing accounting for chiropractors, or do I want to, I love the fact that I've gotten to learn so many different industries. So there's a real balance there. And, depending upon the type of industry, do they need a specialized, industry application, and then make that, does it work with QuickBooks? Does it work with Intact? And, everything's open API, but, integration costs money. So it becomes kind of a challenge. And, we have a couple clients where we're going through that now with Intact, with looking, to do some of these more heavy duty integrations. And, you go in from 5 to 6 figures on some of these things. You can't, that client has to be able to be big enough to afford that.
Yeah. And you actually, as their outsourced CFO, should have a good pulse on being able to know what they can afford to, and advising them on how other companies in their industry, other companies their size, what they typically are investing in accounting software.
Yeah. Well, one of our clients is purchasing a business from someone, and they're using Intact. So now this client wants Intact because the seller is using Intact. And originally the CFO was going to come, and now the CFO is not coming. So we might wind up doing the whole deal because they need somebody that's going to be able to hold their hand through the process. So it's definitely challenging.
You ever seen a case where there's an M&A situation where the buyer is really impressed by the sophistication of how they're keeping the books, and that actually adds a little bit to
I've seen it both ways.
Valuation?
And then you've seen the, oh my God, how are these people operating? And geez, I hope that the numbers, when we did our due diligence, that we were actually looking at good numbers. You see it both ways. I mean, it's, and you go in, you take on a client. A lot of times it's messy. I mean, we have one where in QuickBooks it's so bad that we've spent all kinds of time and we got everything fixed. And then all of a sudden the inventory is going crazy in July because it's pulling like a crazy cost. So that, the cost is like 6 times the sales. So there's a problem, and we can't figure out what the client did, and if it's the client or there's a glitch, because the cost it's using is a cost for something else. It looks like we're not sure. We were going to call QuickBooks. And the client is inventory. We're trying to get the client maybe to go to Intact, but they're a little hesitant. They got used to QuickBooks Online, but they had somebody doing it, another accountant doing it for, helping them with it for years. And, there was like 3 GL accounts when we took over that actually maybe had accurate balances. Everything else had to be fixed. And that's unfortunate. And you have to try to explain to a client. I mean, I've pitched clients where I'm telling them, okay, that's $10,000 to clean that up. I don't get the client. And I'm like, well, I'm not spending $10,000 or more of time not to get paid to clean up the mess that you let someone else make or you made yourself. I mean, that's what happens out there. And that's another, thing people have to understand about the technology. There still has to be done properly. And the most critical part, again, more advice for people starting out, when you set up a client, is be really careful. The setup is so critical. If you set up the chart of accounts and especially the items and the products and services, if that stuff's not set up right, you're just asking for the thing not to really not accomplish what you're looking to accomplish.
That exploratory foundation work super critical.
Yes. And when you're coming in to do a cleanup, that's why my favorite thing when I get a new client is, hey, let's start over. I'm really big on starting over. Like, I want to create my own file, my own chart of accounts. And I've done that. And we took one where it was on QuickBooks Desktop, and we went into QuickBooks Online, and the cash basis, the balance sheet actually imbalanced by a couple $100. Cruel it did. We can't figure out exactly how they got it out of whack. And then every item that happened, instead of just putting it into an account that's already existed, the guy was creating, like, a guy made a mistake. So instead of running it through like exchange account, he called it mistake on such a date and set up a GL account for it or whatever. And so he had like it's a doctor's office. It's like all these GL accounts. And I looked at the client, I'm like, we're not fixing this. There's no fixing this. And sometimes you have to tell the client, we got to start over. And you can't be afraid to tell the client that, books are not good. You're better off. We'll make it so that we'll have this as a place and time, the end of whatever year it is. And those are your books and records. God forbid IRS comes calling, and we'll get the opening balances into a new file, and it'll go good.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about what you see as the biggest mistake, but it seems by far and away it's messing up the setup and the chart of accounts. And the
setup is really critical. File. And, and that's what happened is before QuickBooks came out with their Pro Advisor program, when they decided they tried to go directly to the business owner. They're back to doing that with their live program, but they're probably doing a little bit smarter. And I've heard mixed things. I don't really get involved, but when they when they were doing it, when they were promoting it and telling clients, you could do this yourself, like do it yourself. Like, we're trained, at school, and we've been doing accounting for all these years, but everybody could be an accountant. They can't. And I have two brothers that prove that point, that, the two worst I ever saw, my two brothers. But when you're working through it, you have to explain to the client that, you set this up and it just doesn't work like that. And then the people come in with the Excel spreadsheets. I won't even do a tax return for any business that has their stuff in Excel spreadsheets. That does not qualify as a dual entry accounting system. It just doesn't. You're not going to get the information you need out of it. It's just like a pile of stuff to throw on a tax return.
Actually, I've seen a lot of in-check consultants talk about that's like an opportunity. Client, send me your spreadsheet, send me a screenshot of this, and we'll make it a point of building a dashboard or building reports to make that spreadsheet history.
Yeah, but the spreadsheet a lot of the time doesn't say anything. I'm just talking about they're just quote unquote writing up their books that way. Like, here's my list of deposits, here's my list of checks. That's not, it doesn't qualify.
Yeah, in 2020.
Back in the day when it was Quicken and people were using Quicken. I had a client that insisted on using Quicken. I said, okay, but your fee's going to include putting that into QuickBooks because Quicken doesn't count. The best was the client finally came to because we decided to do QuickBooks. We'll have to get a file. I said, no, you don't have to get a file. I have one. I'll just give it to you. Continue on. I mean, it's that you have to have you have to be willing to invest enough in having the information. And if all you're looking for is to have information throw on a tax return, it's not somebody I personally want to work with. I mean, that's for a tax preparer. You want to be a tax preparer and you're okay with the numbers. I don't. I'm not okay with it. I'm not going to have someone just come to me and say, here's the numbers, put them on my tax return without any backup information and sign my name to it. Yes, you get the client to sign off that they're swearing to you that the numbers are right. But that's not like the type of business I want to do. I want to help business owners and I want to make sure that the numbers are accurate.
Yeah.
So I think that's important because I think that if you're making decisions based on wrong numbers, that's pretty scary.
Yeah, it's all part of that trusted advisor relationship, two-way street of them leaning on you for what you're best at.
Yeah, but I also think too that you really want to educate the clients. We do a lot of client education in sitting down and explaining it to them. I mean, and some have a better understanding. Listen, some people do have a better idea of how finance and accounting works and some don't. But a client that really doesn't understand needs to understand. It needs to understand enough that you could give them a dashboard and say, listen, what is it you need to know? If for example, anybody in the healthcare industry is in private practice, it's patient visits. The patient visits are there, the appointments are booked, the people are showing up, then the money's going to be there, some of it right away, some of it, if you're waiting on an insurance company 30, 45, 60 days, but it's coming. If you see, that there aren't enough patients booked, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that there's going to be a cash crunch at some point, going forward. And that's another really important piece is the cash flow piece and the projections, and we work a lot with clients doing that. We've used Plan Guru for years, probably since there was a Plan Guru. That's the application that we use for that, and it's amazing, and you could build your model in multiple ways, and we love it. We sit with clients and we do the what if scenarios, and now they've finally really gotten it so that it's all cloud-based as well.
Yeah, it's terrific. And because the reality is if they don't have an in-house CFO, they don't have a controller, in some cases they may not even have a bookkeeper. If you're not thinking about these things, nobody's up at 2:00 in the morning worried about these things, although you could argue the CEO, the owner, the president should be, but it's your job to get them to focus on what's really going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have a real reality check. Michele, where do you see this business model going in the next 2 years or so? Outsourced accounting, client accounting services, being an outsourced CFO.
I think that it's gonna continue to ramp up, and I think those who are not, in it, from anybody who's doing any of this type of work and doesn't continue the automation will be lagging behind. And I know that's what Vic.ai is all about, is trying to help us out with getting some of this information more automated and being as much with the robots as possible. So hopefully, I'm looking forward to that. to the robots being able to really do it. I mean, listen, they're still going to need human eyes, but by the time the human eyes get there, they should say, hey, something doesn't look right, or now let's talk about what this all means. This is great. Here's some great financial information. Now, what does it mean? That's where the value is going to be for the accountants. It is going to be all about helping the client. It's going to be about figuring out, what's not working. And it's also, I think what's scary for a lot of the accountants is also too, you can't just live in the financial kind of shell. You've got to kind of also look at, see how operations and marketing and people also affect, the overall on the business. And if something happens, if they're having a people issue, you may not be great at handling a people issue, but at least know, hey, listen, we need an HR type of person here, or we need somebody, you don't have a head of operations, or you need someone to kind of run, the operations piece of it, or you need some outsourced sales and marketing help. There's other aspects, and you tell the client, well, based on the numbers, this is what you need. Now, I'm not, skilled to do that, but you have to be able, have people that you can rely on to go for some of those other outside items within, the client situation, because they need the, to be able to look at all aspects of the business. And at the end of the day, it's really important for the client to have their strategic plan. What is their mission and vision? Where do they want to go? I mean, the best is when the client says, I want to sell in 2 years. I'm like, why didn't you tell me that 3 years ago? I mean, and start to plan for it and put things in place. Michael Gerber wrote in the E-Myth and talked about how they set up McDonald's but made it run without him, and so, the working on the business instead of in the business, and getting the client to a place where their business can run without them. We had a guy come to us and he was afraid to take a vacation. So we had to, work with him to get him to the point where he had enough systems in place, and he figured out who on staff could sort of like watch everything while he goes away, so he could probably take a vacation. There's making more money, and there's an issue of quality of life. So the client can, sometimes we get a client, they're making enough money, but they're working, 70 hours a week, and they're missing all their kids' stuff. That, that it's a different scenario, and just the finances. And one of the things is it's hard sometimes, again, for accountants that are not used to just crunching the numbers, so to speak, that, you sometimes have to kind of listen to the client. And that's a really important factor as well.
Yeah, that's been one of our hypotheses the last couple of years, is that if the clients, all of a sudden, the budget that they've been spending on outsource for the last couple of years, if they're not paying for deciding what's in a document, all of a sudden, all of that extra budget can be reallocated to giving them a lot more value, being a true outsourced CFO, better understanding what's going on in the business, making these deeper recommendations, and talking to them like exit strategy, valuation, building stronger systems.
Yeah. And like since the pandemic, it's really, I think the big buzzword for the pandemic was pivot. Everybody was pivoting. And watching and getting a good laugh. Everybody's pivoting into, masks and other PPE. So now that there's like 7 bazillion people doing that. But, I think that but that's important. And, and we helped everybody get their financing through this. But also looking at cash flow, because, some people, are looking and watching to see, like, we have a restaurant, they can't have indoor dining. So they're hurting, and they're like, okay, right now we have enough money to hang in there till October. And then to see if there's not a second round of PPP, what are we going to do? And sitting there, and keeping abreast and listening to all of the discussions about what's happening along those areas. I mean, I don't know of a time when we've had so much legislation and adjustments to legislation that we've had now, and the rules of the game. And I was trying to, everyone was worried about, using up that money in 8 weeks, and I'm like, no, wait, just from a business perspective, you're not open. So what are you going to do? It's like throwing the money out. Like, wait till you open and then see what happens. Unfortunately, they push it to 24 weeks. So there were a lot of businesses, not so much bars and restaurants, but a lot of businesses that were able to now use up this money and actually get something for their money. Because if you pay people to do nothing, then you're throwing the money. You might as well give it back to the government or back to the bank. I mean, it doesn't make sense. So, I'm planning, but by watching people's cash flow and looking at, what they think they're going to do is becoming more critical. I mean, every business should have been doing it before anyway, you know?
Yeah, definitely guiding clients through uncertain times.
Absolutely.
More and more critical than ever.
Right. But if you're not, working through the numbers and you don't have the accuracy, you can't say to the client, like a lot of times, well, what's my break even and where can I cut? And if I cut so much, how much, do I still have to generate to at least break even? Or I have this much PPP money, how much was my shortage? How long is that PPP money going to last? These are questions that clients need to know.
Yeah, and if they're not asking them, you need to tell them that they should be. They should be asking.
Absolutely.
Your job to sound the alarm before the iceberg. Cool. Michele, it's been super helpful. If somebody wants to learn more about you or follow what you're up to, are you active on social media, LinkedIn, and where would you recommend people go?
Not super. I'm out there. I mean, preferably LinkedIn, and someone certainly could reach out. But I usually willing to connect with whoever is interested in connecting. To be honest, I'm so busy with clients. I have some, the beginnings of a plan, but I haven't executed it yet. To be honest. It's just.
Well, my goal with most of these podcasts is, so whether it's 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road, somebody's going to come up to you at a conference and say, Michele, that podcast that you did with Joshua Feinberg back, remember when you were talking about the importance of getting the chart of accounts right? That totally saved me from taking on a nightmare client. Thank you so much. Well, so that's the goal of all of this.
And like I said, but there are some really great people out there. Listen, you have to kind of sift through who's out there speaking on social media. But some of the groups are good, and they get some discussions and some differences of opinion. And so I think that it's really important. Somebody at Intuit mentioned to me, and I went to my first Facebook group, and it's been really good since then. I mean, I think it's really good for just to watch what's going on, or how much you participate or not.
Online communities, yeah, they're great for meeting people from all over the country, some cases all over the world, but like-minded people. And in a lot of ways, until we get back to normal, this is going to take the place of a lot of what used to happen over coffee or drinks at conferences and in the hallways.
Oh, I look forward to the coffee and drinks again someday. Would be nice. But.
They're coming back. But yeah, this has been terrific.
Well, thank you so much. And I really look forward to seeing what Vic.ai is going to do to help us going forward. So that's an exciting thing. I know you guys are working on a lot of stuff. So
yeah, that's terrific. And I really appreciate you sharing all your terrific institutional knowledge and best practices and war stories of what you go through, what's a good client, what's a challenging, potentially dangerous client, and what you do to make sure that everything stays on the right track.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the AI in Accounting podcast. To subscribe and leave a review, check us out at blog.vic.ai or wherever you like to consume podcast episodes, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube.